The lights at the Dolby Theater pulsed against the crimson velvet curtains as celebrities, scholars, and moguls streamed in. It was the night of the Oprah Winfrey Legacy Summit, an invitation-only event celebrating voices of change. Cameras flashed as A-listers found their seats, each angle choreographed to perfection. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Backstage, a different energy surged. Karoline Leavitt stood in a tailored navy blue blazer, her heels planted firmly on the polished floor. She wasn't on the list. She wasn't in the program. In fact, her request to attend had been explicitly declined, twice. An aide from the Oprah Foundation had responded with a sterile email. This event is curated for individuals aligned with our mission of inclusive progress. Ms. Leavitt's presence is not compatible with that tone. Karoline hadn't replied. She didn't need to. Her response would be written in the room itself, under the brightest lights. An assistant producer paced nearby, glancing at her badge, not a guest pass. A press credential she had pulled from her FOX affiliation. A few glances were exchanged. No one recognized her face quickly enough to object. She moved quietly, weaving through corridors until she stood beside the stage entrance, just out of sight. On stage, Oprah Winfrey herself was speaking. Change doesn't wait for permission. It starts with presence, with choosing to be heard even when others try to tune you out. The applause rose like a tide. Oprah's voice was smooth, composed, full of practiced grace. But Karoline wasn't here to applaud. She glanced at her phone. A message from a friend read simply, "They're not ready for you." She tapped back, "Perfect." And then the moment came. A scheduled speaker canceled last minute due to travel delays, and a 5-minute gap opened on the agenda. Confusion flickered across the producer's face backstage. Karoline moved. Smooth, decisive. She adjusted her mic, stepped into the spotlight, and walked straight onto the stage. The crowd rippled, murmurs, then silence. Oprah turned, blinking. Karoline faced the audience, not Oprah, not security, not the glaring camera. Just the people. "My name," she said calmly, "is Karoline Leavitt. I wasn't invited, I wasn't welcomed, but I'm going to speak anyway." A sharp intake of breath filled the room. Oprah took a half-step forward. Stage staff bristled in the wings, but Karoline didn't move. "Because sometimes," she continued, "what needs to be said won't wait for permission." The audience was stunned, frozen between curiosity and disapproval. It was the kind of silence that could crack wide open into a storm. And Karoline? She was just getting started. Karoline held the microphone with poise, her voice steady despite the weight of hundreds of stunned stares pressing down on her. Security hesitated at the edges of the stage, waiting for a signal from Oprah. But the queen of daytime TV gave none. Only a narrowed gaze, her arms folded tightly across her signature plum-colored dress. She wanted to see where this was going. Everyone did. "I didn't crash this stage," Karoline said, scanning the crowd. "I stepped into the space you left behind. The one where dissent doesn't fit neatly into the program." A man in the third row whispered, "Is this real?" A woman up front reached for her phone. Karoline had cracked through the expectations. Now she was flooding the room with something they hadn't rehearsed for, raw defiance. She didn't yell. She didn't need to. "You filled this summit with powerful voices, but not one of them comes from the side of the aisle that built the economy, secured the border, or stood up to international threats instead of apologizing for them." Gasps echoed. "I know many of you came here to feel inspired, to be comforted by the same familiar monologues. But that's not what change sounds like. Change is uncomfortable. It's inconvenient. It's me standing here right now." A few applause bursts scattered across the room, unexpected, unsure. Oprah's brow furrowed. Karoline glanced her way for the first time. "You talk about progress, Ms. Winfrey," Karoline said directly. "But when I asked to speak here, I was told I wasn't the right fit. What does that mean? Too conservative? Too outspoken? Or just too unwilling to pretend?" Oprah finally stepped toward her. The tension curled tight like wire. "This platform," Oprah began, her voice cool and authoritative, was meant to celebrate unity, not division. Karoline didn't flinch. Then maybe you should have invited someone who doesn't agree with you for once. That landed like a grenade. The crowd murmured. Some clapped. Others shifted uncomfortably. Security moved again, but still didn't act. Oprah's pause meant something. They all felt it. Karoline pressed on. I didn't come here to throw shade or insult anyone. I came here to say what millions of Americans feel and are too afraid to say out loud in rooms like this. She took one step closer to the edge of the stage, her voice rising just slightly, not with anger, but resolve. You brand people like me as dangerous because we won't conform, but I'll take being dangerous over being silent. The lights above flickered, almost on cue, and with that, she stood in total silence, undaunted. Oprah's lips parted, as if to end it there. Her poised demeanor held, but only barely. The Oprah Winfrey Leadership Summit had never experienced anything like this. A rogue speaker, a live microphone, and a crowd that couldn't decide whether to boo or cheer. I admire your boldness, Oprah finally said, eyes fixed on Karoline. But you don't belong here. This isn't your platform. Karoline didn't blink. She stepped forward, slowly and deliberately. Respectfully, Ms. Winfrey, I belong exactly where truth is being avoided. The crowd collectively inhaled. Someone in the second row stood and shouted, "Let her speak!" Another woman murmured, "Get her off." The divide had split the room like lightning, jagged and immediate. Karoline lifted her hand, calm, controlled. I was raised by working-class parents in a town the elites forgot. I didn't go to Harvard. I didn't dine with celebrities, but I fought my way here. And I will not apologize for it. Oprah's eyebrows raised slightly. Her arms slowly lowered to her sides. I came here not just for the people in this room, Karoline continued, but for the millions outside of it. The ones labeled as problems, radicals, or worse, unwelcome. She turned to the crowd now, letting her voice reach the corners. You know what's easy? Applauding words you already agree with? You know what's hard? Listening when the truth doesn't flatter your worldview. A hush fell over the room. Even the tech booth in the back stopped moving. The cameraman wasn't sure whether to cut the feed or zoom in. Karoline pointed gently toward the velvet seats in the front row. I didn't get here on someone's favor. I didn't ask to be liked. I came here with facts, convictions, and a spine. The screen behind her, still bearing the summit's glowing logo, now looked ironic. Unity. One word, shining hollow. Oprah looked down for a moment. When she met Karoline's eyes again, the power dynamic had shifted. Not entirely, but noticeably. There was something Oprah hadn't expected. Maybe it was the crowd's uncertainty. Maybe it was Karoline's unwavering stance. You may not like my politics, Karoline said, but you will never silence my voice. The final line hit like a gavel. One woman stood up and clapped, then a second, then a third. By the time Karoline stepped back from the mic, half the room was on its feet. The other half sat frozen, conflicted, challenged, awakened. Security had reached the edge of the stage. Oprah raised a single hand, signaling them to wait. Her eyes remained fixed on Karoline, who hadn't flinched since stepping up. The line had been crossed, but something unspoken in the air made even protocol hesitate. She's not on the program, one event coordinator whispered urgently into their headset backstage. But no one could deny what was happening. The crowd had shifted. The murmurs weren't just about disruption anymore. They were about resonance. A producer backstage turned to the tech board. Don't cut the feed. This is already trending. Indeed, within minutes of Karoline's first words, clips had exploded across social media. Hashtags like "She spoke" and "Stage Stormer" shot to the top of X and Instagram reels. TikTok was ablaze with duets and breakdowns. Commentary split along the lines you'd expect, applause or outrage. But the one thing nobody could say? That she hadn't made an impact. Karoline took a slow breath and returned to the microphone. Not to yell, not to grandstand, but to clarify. This isn't about me. It's about the monopoly on narratives. When only one kind of story is told, It ceases to be storytelling, it becomes indoctrination. She turned her head to scan the crowd again. You can disagree with me, but you can't erase me. The force of her words wasn't just in her delivery, it was in the undeniable presence of someone who wasn't supposed to be there, yet now couldn't be removed without scandal. Oprah took a step forward, finally breaking the distance. She stood beside Karoline now, not behind a podium, not elevated, but level with her. You've made your point, she said softly, almost respectfully. But this summit isn't built for confrontation. It's meant to inspire unity. Karoline nodded. Then let's start by letting different voices be heard. The crowd, uncertain just moments before, now buzzed with cautious excitement. Phones stayed up, eyes remained locked. Something unscripted, raw, and deeply human was happening, and America was watching in real time. From backstage, a CNN reporter texted her editor. Oprah tried to reclaim the stage, but Karoline owns it now. The stage now held a strange stillness, a suspended moment where no one knew whether this was a scandal or a breakthrough. Oprah's voice had softened the tension, but Karoline's words lingered like smoke. The room wasn't just listening anymore. It was divided, gripped. One of Oprah's senior producers stood in the wings, mouthing to the control booth. Cut it off? But the director shook his head. No way. This is bigger than the script. Karoline turned to Oprah, her voice calm but firm. You said this isn't a debate. But when only one side gets to speak, it's not inspiration. It's a monologue. Oprah didn't respond immediately. Her gaze was steady, but the silence spoke volumes. She had dealt with hundreds of difficult guests, walked through firestorms of controversy. But this was different. Karoline wasn't trying to outshine her. She was trying to shift the spotlight entirely. Karoline's next words cut deeper. You've spent years telling young women to rise, to speak, to never let the world silence them. That message brought me here tonight, even if I wasn't on the list. So now I ask, are those words for everyone, or just the ones who think like you? The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some gasped, others applauded, a few stood slowly as if acknowledging a truth they'd never dared voice. Oprah inhaled sharply, choosing her next move with precision. Courage isn't about barging in. It's about knowing when your voice will help and when it will divide. Karoline stepped back slightly, but didn't retreat. Her eyes stayed locked on Oprah's. Maybe. But courage is also showing up when no one opens the door, and standing still when they try to shut it. That line struck hard. The auditorium felt like it tilted. On social media, influencers and political commentators were already weighing in. Some branded Karoline a reckless provocateur, while others called her a national voice of courage. TikTok Reels repeated her quote on a loop. You can disagree with me, but you can't erase me. Then something unexpected happened. A young woman near the front row stood up. She wore a sweatshirt that read, Harvard Law, and spoke loud enough to cut through the chatter. I don't agree with you, she said, looking at Karoline. But you have every right to speak, and I respect that you did. Karoline's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes flickered. Not triumph, not defiance, gratitude. And that, more than the speech, more than the confrontation, was the moment Oprah noticed the tide was turning. She stepped back from the mic, her voice composed. Then let the audience decide. And for the first time in that summit's history, the crowd didn't wait for permission. They already had. The moment Oprah stepped back, it was as if a dam had broken. The audience, once seated in polite, pre-screened compliance, was now a living current of emotions. Voices rose, some in support of Karoline, others defending Oprah, but everyone was talking. This wasn't just a moment, it was a rupture. Karoline could have stood in triumph. She could have smiled, taken the applause from her corner of the room, and let the controversy seal her as a new political firebrand. But that wasn't why she came, and it wasn't how she wanted to leave. She turned from Oprah and faced the audience directly. Every row, every seat, every phone now recording. You don't have to agree with me, she said, but I ask you to hear me. She walked slowly toward the center of the stage, her hands open, not clenched, not raised. I grew up in a working-class town in New Hampshire. My parents taught me to speak my mind, even when it wasn't popular. I've disagreed with powerful people my whole life. I've been told I'm too young, too loud, too conservative. But I'm here because America was built by people who showed up, uninvited, and spoke up anyway. The audience shifted. The shouting quieted. This wasn't a confrontation anymore. It was a reckoning. I know why some of you are angry, she continued, scanning the room. You think I'm here to provoke, to politicize. But truthfully, I came here to listen. I just didn't expect to be locked out. One woman in the third row nodded slowly, tears in her eyes. I don't expect Oprah to agree with me, Karoline said, turning back briefly. But I believe we share one thing. We want young people to speak, to think, to lead. Then, facing the cameras again, she delivered the line that would soon be clipped and quoted across the internet. I didn't come here to divide this room. I came here to remind it. It belongs to all of us. The crowd broke into a spontaneous applause. Not deafening, not overwhelming, but real. It wasn't just her supporters clapping now. It was people who saw courage in a place they hadn't expected it. Backstage, producers scrambled to adjust the show flow. The segment was now running unscripted, but none dared to cut to commercial. A former Obama speechwriter posted on X, I don't agree with Karoline, but that was one of the most effective off-script moments I've ever seen on stage. Fox News was already preparing the Chiron. Leavitt crashes Oprah's stage and leaves with the mic. And on stage, Karoline stood still, not soaking in applause but preparing herself. Because the real moment, the decision, hadn't yet come. It would come when Oprah stepped forward again. And whether it was confrontation or collaboration, Karoline was ready for it. The room was no longer controlled by lighting cues or teleprompters, it was ruled by tension. The cameras zoomed tighter. The host's chair sat empty. The spotlight clung to Karoline like a verdict still being debated. Then Oprah returned. She walked with grace, as she always had. But this time, the weight behind her steps was unmistakable. The Queen had come back to reclaim her stage. Karoline didn't flinch. Oprah approached calmly, pausing just a few feet from her. The air crackled like thunder was preparing to speak. I gave you your moment, Oprah said softly, her voice controlled but taut. You made your point. Karoline turned, just slightly. Not enough to show retreat, but enough to show respect. I didn't need a moment, she replied. I needed the truth to be heard. A sharp silence. Then Oprah tilted her head, an expression that had undone senators, moguls, and movie stars. It was half curiosity, half caution. This stage, Oprah said, motioning around her, is about inspiration, not division. Karoline stepped forward. Then we agree on more than you think. Another pause. Tension ricocheted between them. Oprah nodded slowly, then spoke again. You came uninvited. Karoline's response came instantly. So did the truth. A murmur rolled through the crowd like a spark across dry grass. No shouting this time, just awareness. That line was going to be quoted, dissected, framed. Oprah's smile was restrained, her eyes scanning Karoline as if recalculating everything she assumed. Then she stepped back, not in surrender, but in signal. Then let the audience decide, Oprah said, gesturing with an open palm toward the crowd. Speak, finish what you came here to say. Karoline blinked once. Was this real? An invitation from Oprah herself? Even a reluctant one? She stepped to the center, this time not as a protester, but as a speaker. The screen behind her lit up with nothing but her name. No party, no title, just Karoline. And for a moment, the entire country felt the stage tilt, not away from Oprah, but toward something unexpected. Not chaos, not control, a shift. Karoline cleared her throat. Then let's begin. Karoline stood alone at center stage, the light unforgiving, the air dense. No script, no aids, no applause cues. Just her, the microphone, and a nation watching. I didn't come here today to fight Oprah, she began, her voice calm but clear. I came here because I was told not to. A ripple moved through the audience, not the sound of judgment, but attention sharpening. They said I didn't belong on this stage, that my voice would disrupt the message. But I think the message was already disrupted by silence, and I won't be silent. The crowd hushed. Even backstage, producers stopped moving. Phones in the audience lit up, not to record, but to broadcast live. I respect what Oprah built, Karoline continued. Millions of people inspired, lifted, healed. But somewhere along the way it became filtered, manufactured. Only certain voices were allowed through. Only certain ideas deemed safe enough for this stage. She scanned the room. Not a soul stirred. I don't hate you for disagreeing with me, she said to the audience. But you should be angry if I had to break through your expectations just to be heard. That's not progress. That's controlled tolerance. A woman in the front row lowered her phone, visibly stunned. A young man mouthed, "Who is she?" to his friend. I came here because if I waited to be invited, I never would be, Karoline said. And I know I'm not alone. There are millions who feel like outsiders in their own country. People silenced by hashtags, censored by algorithms, dismissed by elites who tell them how to think, what to fear, who to hate. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. You think this microphone is power? It's just a channel. Real power is having something to say, and saying it anyway. That line hit like thunder. Even Oprah blinked. Karoline stepped back half a foot. I'm not asking to stay on this stage. I'm proving that I never needed permission to speak truth in the first place. The studio was so still, you could hear the camera sliders panning. Oprah remained frozen in her spot. Her face unreadable, but the people, they leaned forward. Karoline had turned their attention from celebrity to principle, from show to stand, and she wasn't finished. For the first time since Karoline stepped onto the stage, Oprah Winfrey reached for her microphone. The crowd shifted. There was weight behind her silence, decades of authority, of presence, of power. When Oprah finally opened her mouth, the entire studio held its breath. Karoline, she began, voice low and slow. This wasn't your moment. Her words cut, measured and deliberate. This stage wasn't built to divide. It was meant to uplift, to heal. And what you just did, that was disruption dressed as bravery. Karoline didn't flinch. She didn't retreat. Oprah went on, her tone sharper now. I've spent my life building a platform for voices. But voices that understand the responsibility that comes with power, not those who hijack it to throw stones. There was scattered applause, polite, restrained, but it was clear. The air had shifted. Karoline took a single step forward, her heels echoing softly. With all due respect, Ms. Winfrey, she said, her voice steady, you don't get to define bravery. Not for me. Not for the people who feel shut out by the very institutions that once promised them a voice. The words hit with quiet force. Oprah's eyes narrowed just slightly. I didn't hijack anything, Karoline continued. I didn't scream. I didn't insult. I didn't storm this stage. I walked. She held her ground. And if a calm woman with a different opinion walking onto a stage uninvited threatens the integrity of your message, then maybe the message needs rethinking. A few gasps followed that one. A couple heads turned. A producer backstage motioned to cut the feed. Another waved them off. I don't want your spotlight, Karoline added. I want what every American deserves. Equal access to it. For the first time, Oprah said nothing. Not because she agreed, but because she didn't know what part of it to challenge. Karoline scanned the room. They told me I wasn't welcome here. And yet, when I spoke, you listened. That says something. Not about me, about all of us. The lights overhead didn't feel so blinding anymore. She had changed the tone of the room. And no one, not even Oprah, could take that back. And as she turned ever so slightly toward the cameras again, Karoline Leavitt knew the moment had turned. It wasn't about who belonged on that stage. It was about who had the courage to walk onto it. For a moment, the air held still. Oprah Winfrey stood motionless, her hands resting gently on the clear podium as Karoline stepped back, not away, but into her final stance. Her chin lifted slightly. Her blue jacket gleamed beneath the stage lights like a banner refusing to lower. No music cued, no host stepped in, no camera cut, and yet what followed was louder than any applause. A woman in the third row stood up, arms crossed, eyes fixed on Karoline. Then a man in a suit beside her rose as well. Soon, clusters of people across the studio, young, old, left, right, stood up. Not with roaring ovation, but with silent recognition. Karoline didn't smile. She didn't bow. She only met their gaze, one by one. This wasn't victory in the traditional sense. There were no flowers, no post-show praise from the host. But something had shifted deeply. A CNN reporter later described it as the most uncomfortable moment of truth on daytime television in a decade. Social media boiled over. Clips of Karoline saying, "I didn't hijack this stage, I walked," went viral, stitched with user captions like, "That's how you take space," and "She didn't yell, she didn't beg, she just showed up." Backstage, Oprah's producers argued about optics. One whispered, "We should have let her speak from the start." Another, more cynical, muttered, "She just hijacked Oprah's narrative and made it look noble." Karoline walked off stage through the side curtain. Not escorted, not celebrated, but unshaken. Outside, cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters swarmed her, some hostile, others stunned. A journalist asked, "What made you do it?" She paused for half a breath. "I didn't come for them," she said. "I came for the ones who never get past the velvet rope. Someone had to stand. This time it was me." Hours later, her clip played on every network. Fox called her fearless. MSNBC debated her tone. Joy Reid scowled and said, "That's not courage, that's chaos." But the numbers didn't lie. Millions watched, millions commented. And somewhere in a quiet office, Claudine Gay, the very woman who once tried to revoke Karoline's degree, watched the clip in silence. No smugness, no joy, just the dawning realization. She couldn't stop Karoline Leavitt. No one could. Karoline didn't take the stage to be remembered. She took it so others wouldn't be forgotten. For some, a stage is just lights and applause. But for Karoline Leavitt, that stage was a battleground. For silenced voices, for stolen moments, for truth buried beneath applause, meant for someone else. She wasn't invited. She didn't wait for permission. She simply stood up. And in that moment, she didn't just steal the stage. She gave it back to everyone who's ever been told to sit down. If this story moved you, if it made you think, subscribe for more. Because this wasn't just fiction, it was a reflection. Thank you for watching. And remember, sometimes the loudest words are spoken by the ones they tried to silence.